Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Welcome back to another reading vlog. In this reading vlog, I am going to be rereading a couple of my favorite books, a couple of books that I have rated 5 stars. The hollow scene. There's no such thing as a perfect book, and I'm still giving it 5 stars. I did this video back in November of 2024, I think, where I reread 3 books that I had rated 5 stars back in 2023, and I love rereading books. I used to reread books a lot growing up. I think now, being on like the book side of social media, I just get so many recommendations and new releases that are coming out that make me want to read more books versus rereading books that I love. But going back to my roots when I was younger, I'm going to be rereading a couple of books that I really enjoyed. Also, I'm using a mini mic today, so I hope that sound quality is a bit better. I'm editing Jessica jumping in here to say I'm not a huge fan of how that clip sounds with the mic. I'm trying to figure out a way to better the sound quality, and I feel like that was not the best, so I have to play around with it a little bit to see. But I do apologize for how muffled the next little bit will be. Also, I wanted to say that I enunciated some words quite a bit, so it makes that like popping sound into the mic. Yeah, sorry for that. The first book that I'll be rereading is The Ballad of Never After by Stephanie Garber. This is the second book in the Once Upon a Broken Heart trilogy. It is a YA romantasy that follows Evangeline Fox in her quest to find true love and a happily ever after. Something that I really loved about it is that Evangeline Fox isn't your typical badass assassin type snarky FMC that is kind of like a rinse and repeat of romantasies. She is super naive, super trusting, and she's literally a hopeless romantic. Like, all she wants in life is to find her happily ever after. Essentially, in the first book of the series, Evangeline makes a deal with the Prince of Hearts, who is a fate, which is essentially like a god, I guess, in this world. She makes a bargain with him, and because of that, their lives get intertwined. She is on a quest to find her happily ever after, and he is kind of using her to further his own agenda. I also do plan on rereading A Curse for True Love, which is the conclusion of the trilogy, sometime soon, but not in this video. The second book I'll be rereading for this video is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. I've been wanting to reread this book for quite some time now, and I finally got my hands on a copy of it, so I'm going to reread this as well as annotate the physical copy because I originally read this on Kindle. Honestly, it's another book about a girl who makes a bargain with like a higher entity, but in this book she makes a deal with a devil. She's running away from her betrothed marriage in like the 1700s, and she makes a deal with the devil to like live an immortal life, but in exchange for her immortality, no one ever remembers her. So you're essentially following her through like 300 years of her life, being this immortal being that no one remembers until one day she meets someone who actually remembers her, and then you're kind of switching between present day and then like her history. When I read this book in 2023, I loved it so much that I had confidently stated that V.E. Schwab is like one of my favorite authors, having only read this one book. V.E. Schwab's writing is something that I really adore, so I'm excited to do this reread and annotate it. I have heard criticism about this book recently that I definitely agree with, that I don't think bothered me the first time I read this, but I wonder if it'll bother me rereading the book, having all the information that I know now. Now, for my last reread of this video, I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to reread yet. I have 3 options. The first one is Alone with You in the Ether by Olivie Blake. I would say this is like a literary fiction with a romance subplot. I feel like this book is so hard to explain because I don't remember the plot at all. I just remember I loved the writing. Maybe it was just like right book, right time, but I absolutely adored it, so I am curious to see if I still enjoy it now. Another option for my third reread could be Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez. This is a contemporary romance in an interconnected standalone series called Part of Your World, and I didn't originally give this 5 stars. I gave it like 4.75, and the reason I was so picky about it was because some of the writing cringed me out a little bit, so I couldn't give it 5 stars, but it definitely pulled on my heartstrings. I love both of these characters in the story, and I really enjoyed it. I am excited to reread this eventually, if not in this video. The last option is a little bit random in comparison to like these books. This book I read maybe in elementary school or something, and I thought it was such a profound book, and I have reread it multiple times since the first time I read it in elementary school, like in high school, but I haven't read it as an adult. And that book is The Giver by Louise Lowry. It is like a dystopian book where at the age of 12, I think, everyone in this community, this perfect community, is given a role, like a job, and they have to do that job for the the rest of their lives, essentially. And that's how they keep their perfect community running. And main character Jonah, he is given a very unique position in the community where he has to work with the giver. And I don't remember what the giver does necessarily. So I found this book very interesting. And I'm curious during my reread if I'll find it just as enticing and intriguing as I did when I read it when I was younger. Anyways, those are the books that I plan to read for this video. And if I sound like I'm a little bit under the weather or congested or my voice sounds weird, it's because I am. I'm listening to me talk right now and I feel like I'm slowly, one, losing my voice, and two, I sound super croaky. Also, I'm using a mini mic, so I don't know if that has any effect with it. Hopefully the sound is okay and the quality is okay and this mic is fine. I'm starting my rereads with The Ballad of Never After by Garber, so I'm super excited to continue on in this world because I love the main character and I love the male main character, and it's such a fun time to read this book because it's spring, so I feel like it's kind of the perfect weather to read something like this. Update for the first book that I'm reading for this video. As expected, I'm very much enjoying my reread of this book. I will say that I'm perhaps not in the mood for YA writing, or this book feels a little bit more YA than I remember it being when I first read it back in 2023. Granted, that was only 2 years ago and I was an adult when I read it already, so maybe I'm just not in the mood for YA writing, or I'm kind of grown out of YA writing, because I feel like the books I've been reading lately in the past few months or so have definitely been more adult. I think this is the first YA book I've read this year, or maybe in the past few months it's the first YA book I've read. So I'm not loving the writing as much as I did when I read it in 2023. However, that being said, I feel like Garber does such an amazing job with making the world seem so whimsical and so magical that it instantly transports you into the world as you're reading the book. And I think also the fact that you're in Evangeline's point of view and she believes everything to be very magical, she's very naive and trusting, and she sees the world in this very positive light. So I think that also attributes the way that you feel as a reader. My favorite thing about this book and the series as a whole is definitely the romance that transpires. I will say it's kind of like a slow burn. There's definitely tension and banter between the two main characters that you get to experience. However, nothing really romantic transpires until maybe the last few chapters of this book, and then into the third book as well. But yeah, so far I am really enjoying my reread. I have a couple more hours of work left, so I'll probably pick this back up after work. It is currently a very beautiful sunny spring day, so I might go for a walk, go to the park, and read this book for a little bit. But for now, I'm back to work. Reading update, I finished The Ballad of Never After and I had so much fun. I'm not saying that this is the best book ever or the best book series ever, but if you're looking for a YA book that's a good fun time, that is pure escapism, that gives you feelings like reading a fairy tale story, this is the series. I would say that when I had first read this book in 2023, I feel like I gave it a 5-star based off of the cliffhanger ending, because if you've read this book, you know that it ends on a cliffhanger, and it's a pretty major cliffhanger, and it definitely got me excited to read book 3, which came out a couple months after I read this book. So I will say that the 5-star rating is probably because of how crazy the last 100 pages of this book was. But even in saying that, I feel like the plot of this book, specifically out of the series, is my favorite plot. Out of the 3 books, you definitely get a lot more character development, fantasy world development, and romantic relationships development, and I feel like it is done so well. My favorite scene of this series is in this book. It is the hollow scene. If anyone has read the series, you know, but rereading that scene again, it was still so good the second time. So fun. I love the main male character and the female main character together. I feel like this book doesn't suffer from middle book syndrome or second book syndrome or anything. I think this one is my favorite favorite out of the trilogy, and I think it's the best out of the trilogy in terms of like the plot, the pacing, and everything that goes on and everything that you learn in this book. I will say if I had read this last year or this year, I don't know if I'd give it a 5 stars because there is things that I can critique about it. Reading this now, I think the writing is a little bit too YA, but I'm willing to look past it because I love the world and the characters so much in this series, and it will remain a 5 stars for nostalgia. Next, I decided to pick up Alone with You in the Ether by Olivie Blake. I was originally going to read The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue next, but I think I'm more in the mood for something like this. I started the book this morning, but I think I only read like 5 pages of it. Essentially, this book is about 2 different characters and their worlds collide, and they are very different people. Regan, the main female character, she believes people are very predictable and boring, so to kind of combat that, she leaves a very impulsive life. On the flip side, Aldo, who is the main male character, he finds the world super chaotic and he lives his life by routines and formulas, and he's very like mathematical. And then the 2 of them meet, and I think Aldo has perception of life when you meet new people that you can really discern a lot from them or like learn a lot from them based on 6 separate conversations that you have with this person. So Regan takes him on that bet essentially, and they have set aside time for like 6 separate conversations to see if his theory proves true. Like I said, I haven't gone too far into the reread yet. I'm only like 5 pages in, so I can't say too much about my thoughts on it yet, but going to continue this reread and we'll see how it goes. Reading update. It's currently Friday. I'm just wrapping up work for the week. It has been a crazy work week, or like it's been a crazy past 3 weeks or so of work. So I'm very excited for the weekend. I'm very excited that it's Friday. I have read quite a bit more. I'm on page 62 now of this book, and it's pretty short. I think it's a little under 300 pages, so not a very long book. And I think I mentioned this when I was talking about the book, but I actually don't remember much of the plot of this book at all. And the main reason I remember liking it was because of the writing. And now that I'm reading it, now that I've read like 60 pages or so, I can definitely say that the writing was the selling point of this book for me. I think a lot of people don't like the writing. It is a little bit more pretentious than your everyday writing. Other than the writing, what I'm really enjoying about this is the interactions that the 2 main characters have, Aldo and Regan. I think I mentioned before that Regan finds everyone very predictable, and that's why she lives a very impulsive life. You get kind of insight into how her family sees her as a very reckless, impulsive person. On the other hand, Aldo, he is the son of a single parent. You kind of get to know his family dynamic a little bit. His father owns a restaurant. He's very hardworking. His father checks in on him every single day. Aldo is a PhD student. He's studying math. He's very interested in like time travel. I don't really know how to explain the mathematics that he is involved in, but he's very interested in like variables, and there's a whole thing about bees, which is why there's a bunch of bees on the cover. He's very good at figuring people out. He thinks that people are predictable, but in his own kind of way, because he sees them as like variables, and he thinks that if he can notice these details about someone, he can piece them all together and like be able to explain who they are through these variables. And he meets Regan, and he feels like he can't figure her out, so he's very curious. As well, Regan also thinks that people are very predictable, but just because she feels like she can read them. And when she meets Aldo, she finds that he is a very unpredictable person, which also piques her interest. And what I like about this outside of the writing, I feel like banter isn't the right word, but it's kind of the banter between Aldo and Regan. Kind of mirrors of each other, but in completely different ways. They're like nothing alike and yet very similar in thinking, and I feel like they understand each other in a way that other people don't, and I think that's kind of what makes them curious about each other. So the past few pages I've read, there's like this back and forth between them, and I wouldn't classify it as banter because I feel like banter means a very specific thing in the rom-com world, but they just have this back and forth quips with each other. And what I like about it is that it's not even told to you that they feel this like connection with the other person. I just feel like it's written in a way that it's shown without having to tell me that they can kind of understand each other on a different level in comparison to other people they've met. I don't know if what I just said makes any sense, but I am very much enjoying this reread. I do have dinner plans today, which doesn't happen very often, but a friend of mine is visiting for the weekend, so we're going out for dinner. I'm going to get ready after I film this clip, but I just wanted to provide a little bit of a reading update with where I was at so far. And then once I get home, I'm going to continue reading this as well because I am very excited to just keep reading. But anyway, for now, I'm gonna go get ready for dinner, and then when I get home, we're gonna continue reading A Live With You in the Ether. So I thought I'd give a little bit of a reading update. I did finish A Live With You in the Ether yesterday, and I'm still giving it 5 stars. I've written down a couple of notes because I don't want to forget anything that I kind of thought of after I had finished reading it yesterday. So if I'm looking down, I'm just looking at my laptop. But a couple things that I want to mention about this book. I've been talking about it like it's a romance, and I think I mentioned in the intro that I would say this book sways more towards a literary fiction than a contemporary romance, but I feel like it's marketed as a contemporary romance, and I feel like it has low ratings on Goodreads because of that reason. So if you go into this book thinking it is a literary fiction with a romantic subplot, you might like it a bit better. At the core of this book is about a girl with a mood disorder, and she's trying to deal with it and manage it in her own way that makes it feel good for her, while everyone else around her, her family, her friends, her boyfriend, etc., they're trying to make her deal with it in a way that feels more manageable for them and puts less of a burden on them. And in a way, Regan kind of feels like no one understands her because of this. In saying that, beginning of the book, she is on this medication and she's taking it like on a regular basis, but she also just feels that like no one really understands her. Then she meets a boy who kind of changes everything. He shatters her perception of the world, of herself, of her mood disorder, because in a way he really gets her, and even if he doesn't, he really does try. In reading the acknowledgements of this book, you find out that Olivie Blake suffers from bipolar disorder, and during her first year of law school, events were happening in her life that led her to quit law school and write this book. And in knowing that, I feel like this book is even more near and dear to my heart because it comes from a personal place from the author. It's kind of like she's being very vulnerable with us in explaining her experience with bipolar disorder and trying to put her thoughts into words into Regan's character. Something that really resonated with me in this book is that I feel like I could relate to certain aspects of Aldo and Regan, and I really liked the way that Olivie kind of encapsulates their thoughts and explains how their brain works in writing. I like the fact that it's hardly explicitly stated that Regan has a mood disorder, like at least within like the first few pages, or like when you find out that she's on medication. And Aldo's also dealing with something internally, but you kind of don't know that because it's not explicitly stated, but you do know that just because of the way she writes their story and how they think. I always find it a bit vulnerable to say that I resonate with certain characters or things that happen in books, but I will be a bit vulnerable in saying that I did resonate with Aldo and Regan in some aspects of this book, so I think that's kind of what hit the mark home for me. The reason this book doesn't have great ratings on Goodreads is because it's marketed as a contemporary romance when I feel like it shouldn't be. I feel like the two characters have this like soulmate connection, but I wouldn't ever think of them as like my favorite couple. I I feel like this book is so much more than that, and I feel like the two characters realize that in the book because they're talking about how they're falling in love with each other, and yet in both of their perspectives they're talking about how saying I love you to each other doesn't feel like enough because it doesn't feel like it encapsulates the feelings that they have for each other or the connection that they have for each other. Like the word love just feels so trivial to them because there's like something more beyond just being boyfriend and girlfriend to each other that makes the relationship special. At the end of the day, this book is about someone who's battling a mood disorder, and at one moment she's on medication and she learns to live without it, but she does talk about having manic thoughts and periods of time where she talks about her like waves of mania and depression. So if that is something that could be triggering to you, I would just be mindful of reading this book. For the last book of this video, I am reading The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V. Schwab. I've only gotten a couple pages in, but I do plan to read more after work. Right now we're back in time in history where Addie LaRue is making the deal with the devil slash demon. I actually don't know what his proper name is. And now she's starting to see the consequences of the deal that she had made. But for now, I'm back to work and I'll continue reading this afterwards. Final reading update. First and foremost, I love this writing. I understand the critique of so many words, so little plot, but I enjoy the descriptiveness of her writing, like the floweriness of it, and I have no complaints. Actually, that's not true. I have complaints about how many times her constellation freckles were mentioned. I didn't notice that the first time I read it, but I did see someone mention it, and then I clocked it every time it was written in this book. And there was a lot, probably at least like 50 times was it mentioned. I want to address some critiques of this book because I had seen these critiques after I read this book in more recent months, and I agree with the critique, but I do have a few rebuttals now that I've reread the book. First one being, like I mentioned, so many words, so little plot. I think the book, like the synopsis, kind of sets you up for a low stakes fantasy. I wouldn't even classify this as like a full-fledged fantasy. I'd say this is like kind of like a literary fiction with magical realism. I would say the fantastical elements are not very intense, so I feel like you should expect it to be more of like a slower paced, less enticing plot. For everyone that's kind of like nothing goes on in this book, she's just living her life, and I feel like that's the synopsis of the book. So I feel like, yes, I agree with that critique. There is a lot of flowery descriptive writing, but I feel like it's kind of expected. In saying that, I do understand that's not everyone's cup of tea. The pacing of this book picks up 100 pages in. Like the first 100 pages is all set up, and then you finally meet the character that remembers her. So I feel like that's when things start getting interesting, but you're really understanding more about her like bargain and her curse within the first 100 pages. The second critique that I often see of this book is Addie lives 300 years and has no character development or character growth. I feel like the story is kind of centered around endurance and hope and like having dreams and trying to accomplish those dreams, and I feel like that's who Addie is at her core. Like even before she made the bargain, that's kind of the life that she was leading, and all her life all she wanted to be was like free of expectations from society, free of like her duty, I guess, as a woman. So I feel like in saying that she has no character growth and development, I don't fully agree with that. Yes, she's lived 300 years and had so many like life experiences. Yeah, she's also basically forever 23, and I feel like one at that age, but in general, socialization is so important for a person's growth, and Addie has not had a proper social life or had proper relationships, proper friendships in her entire life of being alive. In those 300 years of life that she's lived, she's essentially living like a Groundhog Day situation, and yet time is still passing her by, but she herself cannot change. So yes, she has lived a very long life, but she hasn't had the same experiences that someone who lives a normal life can. Like even someone who's 23 or in their 20s, they would have certain like friendships and relationships by this point, and they would grow with those friendships and relationships, but she cannot have them because no one remembers her. So she's never had a stable thing in her life ever. And at the end of it, I feel like she makes a pretty selfless decision that she may not have done before. So I feel like there was character growth. So I just don't know what character growth people are expecting. But maybe it's because like she's lived so long and like nothing's changed, but she hasn't had the same life experiences that someone who doesn't have this bargain would have lived in 300 years, if that makes sense. And then the last critique is something that I wholeheartedly agree with. It's one that I agree with the most, and that is it's labeled as a historical fiction, and yet the historical fiction aspects of the book aren't really delved into that much. I feel like V. Schwab had the opportunity to do so much with the historical fiction aspect, but at the same time I don't think that was the intent of the book. I feel like it was more of like a character study and like discussion about art and being a woman and like, you know, that kind of thing, more so than the historical fiction part. So within this book I feel like there's like 3 key themes. First one being power of like art and creativity and creating something that's everlasting. 2, the power of endurance and hope. You see her suffer through so many things, everything that comes with this deal that she had struck, and yet she still endures and finds a will to survive every single day for like 300 years. Although I will say that a part of the reason I feel like she is willing to survive or like pushes herself to is like out of a place of pride, because she wants to spite Luke, the person that she made the deal with, in showing that she's capable of surviving despite being in these like suffering conditions. That is one part of it, but I feel like at the end of the day she still has so much hope and wonder, and she's still a dreamer, and that's kind of what's driving her to keep going. And lastly, I think another key theme is like society's perceptions and expectations of women. I think that's talked a lot about in like the 1600s, 1700s, in the past timeline that she's talking about, and then it kind of carries throughout the rest of the story. And I feel like that's something that's really prevalent nowadays, being talked about a lot, and it's something that I guess resonated a lot with V. Schwab, so that's kind of why she built it into the story. If there was historical fiction, I think it would have added to the story. Like I think it would have done so much for it, but I'm not bothered that it wasn't included. I think I would still rate this book 5 stars. Despite those critiques that I agree with, I still kind of got that like 5-star feeling while reading it, and I would say there's no such thing as a perfect book, so I'm still gonna say this is a 5 stars for nostalgia and just because I really enjoy the writing. These are the 3 books that I reread, and I enjoyed my reread of all of them. I would still say they're all 5 stars to me, to be honest. That pretty much wraps up this video. If you're interested in following along with what I'm reading outside of these videos, my Goodreads and Fable are always linked down below. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.